Hello, Berlin. This is going to be a little bit lowbrow, as we had a lot of highbrow academic and intellectual material. So I'm going to drag things a little closer to the gutter today. Total nuclear Armageddon occurred first when I was aged 7. My entire school was dead in an instant, lying still on the asphalt of the playground, just as the running inhabitants of Hiroshima had been burned into shadows on the pavement. This was my introduction to nuclear war, and everyone's parents were furious. Furious that a film crew had been able to come and shoot propaganda without their permission. Not furious that we were under the shadow of the bomb and the extinction of all living things. We were the children of Oppenheimer, playing dead in that ritual performance, and some of us awoken into existential teenagers as the Cold War bit deeper. Death is an initiator, and missiles were stationed across Europe, provoking a spasm of feminist witchcraft. The tropes of mutation and post-apocalypticism were rife in the magical underground. However, most of us were pacified by the plastic Barbie and Ken commercialism of the American empire that advanced with the same military precision. How little has changed. Generation X, another American imperial term, had the realization that we were always 3 minutes away from annihilation, or the cancer-riddled sickness of survival as a nuclear winter snowed us under in a blizzard of radioactive isotopes. Our safety relied on mutually assured destruction, a suicide pact that did not reward the first mover on the tactical chessboard. And that balance now seems more unstable than ever before. The doomsday clock waits at an unprecedented 90 seconds to midnight. Everyone seems scared of the future and scared of each other. We have, in fact, I would argue, passed through 3 significant crossroads in recent history. And by crossroads, I mean paths that we cannot return down. The first crossroad was 1789, with the death of God, with the guillotine of his proxy, King Louis XVI. That headlessness cannot be undone. It is not coincidental that headlessness remains one of the most dominant motifs in European occultism. Mark this point. 1789 is the birth of modern Luciferianism. The second crossroads, the world wars, where 2 brothers, fascism and socialism, brought forth from the corpse of Christianity, ushered in the era of mass killing, the Holocaust, playing out the great tension between the individual and the collective or state. It was the death of the old world, and with it the church, whose moral authority was gone. The re-evaluation of all morals that Nietzsche had promised had come. This was the age of Crowley. My focus today is on the third crossroads, the bomb, destroyer of worlds. And the birth of the new age can only be properly dated to the Trinity test, July the 16th, 1945, in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Oppenheimer spent 3 days and 3 nights under the stars searching for his ritual site. He found a remote area of the desert infested with rattlesnakes. Jornada del Muerto, the Spanish called it, the journey of the dead man. And that was where the gadget was suspended in its scaffold tower, waiting for a portentous lightning storm to subside, kept awake by a plague of frogs and the fear that they would be drenched in radioactive rain, the bomb was finally triggered at 5:30 in the morning, according to eyewitnesses, in a big ball of orange. An energetic and magical effect rippled across the desert in a pulse of sand, in a hot blast of air, visible for 100 kilometers to the naked eye, but the shock waves were felt across the world. A rough stone obelisk now marks the site, basking in the half-life of isotopes, an image itself of the Miltonic sublime. I note that Oppenheimer, a supposed scientist, had a four-leaved clover in his pocket, had spent the night before reading Baudelaire's Les Fleurs de Mal, told his wife of the success of the operation in a code inspired by the Iliad, and quoted the Bhagavad Gita. A perfect spell, a blend of folk magic, literate magic, affirmation, and hard science, expressed in the blended wisdom of the East and West. It's Berlin, so we get an antidote to all the black everywhere. What can move through a crack in an atom? Nothing less than an entirely new age, as we broke through a fundamental barrier in human development, which was as significant as fire. The dramatic shift that occultists such as Blavatsky, and very much following her lead Crowley, had tried to predict and harness for their messianic schemes, dawned here, as a captive sun rose, released above the Mesa. The age of Aquarius, an imprecise processional event, had revealed its election and would pour out its vials on the earth, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in what were totally unnecessary atrocities. A dying Crowley read of the news in the London Times and would write in his diary, alleged atomic explosion, query the war engine of Liber Legis, Book 3. And in his Thoth Tarot, the devil appears to stand before a nuclear eruption, a mushroom cloud with its distinct ringed shaft. But that was neither his nor Frida Harris's conscious intent. Marjorie Cameron had a different take. She believed the war engine to be a flying saucer, as one of the new wave of occultists for whom the bomb, the terrible god for its new age, and its reflex, the flying saucers, were of paramount importance. Her sighting of a silver UFO, cigar-shaped UFO, she told to Jack Parsons, who carefully noted it in his diary, believing that it proved the success of the Babylon working. Kenneth Grant, here with his slick-back Bela Lugosi look, head of the Typhonian OTO, thought we were on the verge of catastrophe, like that which befell Atlantis. And the New Age often framed the destruction of Atlantis as a nuclear event. And if you follow alternative history, you'll notice they're talking about Atlantis again. Grant advanced his own occult theory, believing that the bomb had, quote, ruptured the subtle membrane of the Earth's magnetic atmosphere, creating a massing of the shades, which swarmed through 2 years later. The latent potential of the rupture, a cosmic sexual image, had been transformed by the incursion of the forces brought by the Babylon working and was manifesting as the UFO phenomena. Grant observes that the saucer wave of 1947 occurred in the year of Crowley's death, which he believes is significant. However, Kenneth Arnold, who we can see with his drawing of the saucers he saw, and that was the first use of the term flying saucer. This occurred in June. Roswell, as we can see in the Roswell Daily Record, reliable news source, happened in July. But Crowley died in December. So Grant, as usual, was slightly adrift with his logic. Ufologists propose that the Roswell craft was observing the nuclear tests at the nearby White Sands, making it one of several new UFO incidents which involved nuclear facilities. Now, given these powerful and transformative effects, people wanted to link Parsons to these incidents, both Roswell and also Arnold's sighting, but they're all demonstrably false. People were reaching after a myth. The most famous of these is the lurid conspiracy of final events by Nick Redfern, where he unfolds a Christian conspiracy theory that UFOs are not in fact aliens, but demonic forces, fallen angels who have made themselves known and are being followed by a shadowy group known as the Collins Elite. This sounds to me like a retelling of Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End, but through a paranoid Christian lens. And although Final Events is perhaps the worst book I have in my extensive library, it's taken very seriously by the power brokers in Washington, D.C., who still think that this is a reliable source of information. Well done, Christians. But they also have their fingers much closer to the button than any of us occultists do. But to leave the door ajar slightly, 2 days after Jack Parsons' death in 1952, we saw the famous invasion of Washington, D.C. encounter. And Cameron believed and wrote that the UFOs were a trans-dimensional link to her dead husband. But these are not nuts and bolts spaceships. In Hecate's Fountain, Grant compares the flying saucer to the Holy Grail, with the logic that both descended from the sky. The spinning he relates to an activated chakra enlivened by the fire snake of Kundalini. And he records that orange-red or scarlet is predominant in UFO sightings, a visual we see exploited by Kenneth Anger in his Lucifer Rising series. This is Anger's personal design for it, but I'm sure we've all seen the orange UFO flying across Luxor in Lucifer Rising. Grant goes further and turns to gematria and tells us authoritatively that the initials UFO add up to 156. But they don't. Which you might expect when that's related in a chapter called Zothirian Gnosis. Grant, of course, follows Michael Bertillot further and considers that the spherical reservoirs of sexual energy held in reserve by magicians may be mistaken for UFOs. So, were these globules the residue of the Babylon working, lost children looking for their hosts? One of the many myths which emerged around the death of Jack Parsons was that he himself was working clandestinely at Los Alamos, an almost arrow straight 1,200 clicks east of Pasadena, where many of the scientists have been recruited from. And Grant repeats this, stating that Parsons was engaged in nuclear research. And here we see an attempt to create a chemical or chimerical wedding of the nuclear and the extraterrestrial. Grant opines in Outside the Circles of Time. Parsons opened a door and something flew in. He supposed it was Babylon in the 4th chapter of Al. Others have supposed other things. but all are agreed that something unusual, something inexplicable by mundane laws occurred around that time. So Parsons is used to prove the most powerful part of Grant's thesis, that the central aim of Thelema is congress with extra-human entities, from Aiwas to Alamantra, from Corazon to the Qliphoth. Grant continues, for all his mistakes, Parsons made inroads on the unseen worlds. He was one of those who paved the way for the present-day passion for all things strange and occult, for drugs, UFOs, black sex, mutations, and the probability, as against the possibility, of man's communicating with supramundane intelligences capable of transforming life on the planet, a phenomena which Crowley had spent a lifetime trying to demonstrate. It was these outer ones, or masked shades, whom Grant yokes to a pastiche of weird fiction, and H.P. Lovecraft's cosmology in particular. Notably, Thelemite Jim Wasserman and Grant biographer Peter Lavender would close that circle with their own production of the, thank you, Cthulhu, with their own production of the Simon Necronomicon in the 1970s. Do you have a tech guy? Do we have a tech guy anywhere for this? Wonderful blue screen of death. Oh, that one's working. Cool, we'll use that one. We'll move over there. Grant was directly inspired by Powell's and Bergier's hugely successful The Morning of the Magicians, which was heavy on the Lovecraft. Lovecraft had survived in France better than anywhere else. They proposed that we were on the cusp of a mutation that would bring forth a new human, a notion that was taken up by the 60s counterculture, who ultimately transposed their hopes onto LSD-25. The theme of the Übermensch, whether through the eugenics of Huxley, the awakening of psi powers suggested by Mossad agent Uri Geller, or the Faculty X of Colin Wilson, are all occult projects that haven't been fully pursued. But it was only Grant who proposed the occult method by which the change could occur. Quote, the incursion of extraterrestrial influences into the human life wave, unconsciously or consciously attracted to the individual embryo, would be a way of incarnating such mutants. So Grant's reworking the Moonchild theory of Crowley, which was a significant inspiration behind the Babylon working, but he's reframing it as alien-human hybrids. The originary myth is, of course, to be found in Genesis 6:4 and 1 Enoch. The first post-bomb version of the nuclear mutant story, where are we at? Oh. There. The first post-bomb nuclear version of the mutant story was lent a veneer of respectability by the New York Times, now obviously a shit news source, who in 1945 invited John W. Campbell, editor of Astounding Science Fiction, friend of Jack Parsons, and co-founder of Dianetics with L. Ron Hubbard, to write for them. So, in the New York Times, he stated, after a big international atomic war with atomic bombs exploded on the ground, a lot of survivors will be mutated. They'll give birth to freaks, or supermen, or telepaths. So, there was a sense that the mutation, perhaps as a result of nuclear war or contact with the entities, would cascade through the population, resulting in a remarkable change, a doubling in human intelligence, which we see followed up by... Hello? Oh, no. Which we see followed up by our friend Timothy Leary with his space migration, intelligence doubling, and life extension, happy transhumanist approach. Even when we look at things such as the encounter with the secret chiefs of the Golden Dawn, Grant believes that this was a nuclear event. I disagree with Grant. about many, many, many things. However, what I do agree with Grant with is that it's the role of the occult to contact and negotiate with these alien phenomena, to run against the ticking clock of nuclear annihilation. I also agree with Grant that we should be promiscuous with our sources, drawing from high and low culture. And from Grant, I believe we can extract a core lesson. Look further. Look further. The signs are embedded in a range of cultural products, epiphanies, and communications that arise from an inspirited cosmos. But Grant too often makes of the world a dirty spider's web in which the magician's struggles tug on trap lines that run into terrifying cosmic depths from which unseen monsters will emerge and consume both us and our sanity. He vacillates as to which side he's actually on. But beneath the Lovecraftian misanthropy, I just see the same fallen angel story: ingress, congress, transformation. So to finish this section, I'd like to finish everything. I'd like to take an idea from Peter Colosimo, who I don't think anyone reads anymore, who was an Italian writer, a Marxist-Leninist who loathed the occult. And he was one of the founders of Fanta-archaeology, fantasy archaeology, drawing on the same kind of material that Erich von Daniken was. And looking at Colosimo, Colosimo believed that if we connected to an imagined ancient past and linked that to a utopian future, we could make that become real. And I think that's something we can also take from the Typhonians. We can propose a magical future, and if we propose a magical future, we can step into it rather than to the dystopias which have been prepared for us. Grant is essentially driven by his eros, and his particular genius is somewhere in the crepuscular realm of pessimistic horror, whereas Parsons' genius is in the more optimistic realm of fantasy and science fiction. Both are having creative, erotic responses to powerful yet liminal external forces and drives which breach through in both ritual and dream. So, as occultists post the Babylon working, we can legitimately ask if a door was open to another dimension. What if we all passed collectively through to the seventh air? What do I mean by that? I mean that the libidinal energies that have been imprisoned by Christianity had to play themselves out in terms of the apocalypse. New gods needed to be born, and where else could they emerge from but Scripture? 2,000 years of Christianity had ended, and the symbols needed to be liberated, needed to be revalued, the story, and with it, the fate of men rewritten. It is not that the old gods died, but Christianity made them monsters, alienating us from one another by making sex the original sin, and weakness, compliance, and ressentiment into virtues, which could only serve an emergent capitalism. Here, between the nuclear rift and the subsequent UFO phenomena, is the third component, the erotic. Here we see a dancer on Angel's Peak, and if you look over her left hip, you can see the nuclear cloud from a test rising behind her. Fascinating image. We're certainly the alien children of this moment, half gods, half monsters, part liberated, part caught between worlds, poised between annihilation and epiphany, fearing what both we and our world can become. To use a sex magical metaphor, Our attitude must not be post-coital regret, but future dreaming. And I'll give another one of these crazy erotic images. So after the war, the bomb was used again on Bikini Atoll in Operation Crossroads, creating what Grant would call a tangential teratoma, the bikini, itself a child of the atom. The French press called it the atom bomb of fashion. Thin enough, said its designer, to pull through a wedding ring, which sounds like a ritual. So, the bomb, like the Sphinx, is here to ask us some fundamental questions about ourselves. What kind of new human was required to master this dreadful power? The science fiction community were asking this, and in that science fiction community were Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. In the May 1950 edition of Astounding Science Fiction, this isn't my copy, but I have one of these disintegrating mags. Hubbard launched Dianetics, the prequel to Scientology, and in the editorial, he and John Campbell ask, "Up there are the stars. Down in the arsenal is the atom bomb. Which one is it going to be?" This was a question very much heavy with dread because we were on the verge of the Korean War and a risk of nuclear confrontation with Russia. But this is a binary choice. Do we have a choice between the bomb and the stars? Or are we simply fated for destruction? The previous crossroads do not bode well. The test of fascism and communism, of conformity and complicity in the age of mass death, revealed terrible truths written into the human psyche and the banality of evil. If we fail to prevent these catastrophes, how could we live up to the challenge of the bomb? Undaunted, the science fiction writers continued. In the November 1950 edition of Astounding Science Fiction, Hubbard and Campbell provided their answer. The mind and nerves of men control the atom. No longer waiting on the wild card of mutation, they proposed a new science of mind to transform us into wiser future humans who will master ourselves to master the atom. It didn't go well. We resist auditing systems, regimentation, because they exclude the irrational, the liminal, and the subtle realms of the occult. Such hierarchical structures as Dianetics and Scientology replicate conformist thinking and ultimately atrophy. The positive desire for self-knowledge and transformation was hijacked by a personality cult. But did the bomb give man the power of God, as Oppenheimer had famously said? Or conversely, did the bomb give man over to chaos, the power of God in the atom, replacing the power of God in church and state? Did it reveal our chaotic drives in the stellar apotheosis of the nuclear event? The failure of Dianetics undoes the idea that rational process is the answer to our dilemma. We are not tape recorders or computers, but are complex, organic, magical beings. So I propose a Nietzschean version of the story, that the chaos of the atom is the untamable rebellion and chaos of the human being laid bare. The bomb showed us ourselves. But are these even new questions? Do not all civilizations pass through a moment where they realize they have the power to extinguish themselves? And as individual humans, we all realize that all things must pass. Is a fear of annihilation, fear of our own death writ large, and ultimately fear of our bodies, their permeability, mutability, and fragility, and conversely and increasingly a fear of their strengths, a fear of their passions, and a fear of their appetites. We've confronted this situation many times before. Prometheus, the Nephilim, Lucifer, Frankenstein. Our tradition, the magical tradition, is distributed across a range of cultural and imaginal artifacts, holding both the answers and cautionary tales as to how humanity responds to new and transformative technologies. Fire, electricity, fission, fusion, metals, plants, poisons, knives, all require careful handling rather than being blanketly castigated as evil. It was the worlds of science fiction, music and film which attempted to catalyze these symbols into a new human story which used mass media to advance profoundly esoteric agendas. It informs the science fiction of Heinlein in Stranger in a Strange Land, David Bowie in The Man Who Fell to Earth, Ridley Scott's Replicants via Philip K. Dick, and David in Prometheus. All of these are direct descendants of the Babylon working. So what does this all mean for the practice of magic, as we realize that we are still beneath the shadow of this ominous cloud, and that the skies are still filled with strange signs? Rather than seeing these events as something to fear, which only gives power to tyrants, they can be encountered with a sense of wonder and great admiration. What I began as a child when I lay on the asphalt was the death meditation, which remains a core part of my practice daily. The nuclear power is not external, but is within all of us. In the mystery of mysteries, sex, where we are annihilated and reborn, where we understand that we are both ephemeral and immortal. Humanity is a process, and the idea of mutation arises from the sense that we contain unforeseen possibilities, both good and ill, waiting to unspool their telos. As the digital alienates us from our flesh, and we are offered the stupidity of technological transhumanism, it's easy to forget how little we know about these magnificent bodies and their potential expressions. What's fundamental to us when we engage in spirit work is the structure of the invisible world and that chain of authority. When the king dies, that changes. First crossroads. When God is dead, that changes. Second crossroads. When we have the power to end our culture and our civilization, that changes. Third crossroads. We are not so much become gods, but have been made conscious of the chimeric gods that move through us. Gods are not materials, but reveal themselves in the passions and the technologies, the techniques and the rituals embedded in stone, bronze, iron, and uranium. Ours is always the transforming god of fire who dies and is reborn, and the bone woman who pulls urgently at our blood tides. We consort with the angels of the wind and weathers, the animals, plants, planets, and stars. These are the strata and the ceiling, heaven and hell, and they do not go away. And UFOs, regardless of their origin, are encountered as sub-lunar phenomena in the world of the demonic, in our world, for which we have a tradition and established protocols. So we now have a star in a bottle, and it reveals not a new God, but the old gods, the return of the gods that Nietzsche predicted and which Christianity cast out as sin. But they are guised in new ways and witnessed with new eyes. There is no going back. We have to actively form the future by transforming ourselves and engaging with other intelligences. The resulting shockwave will once more transform the world. In this way, we will go beyond the limits of the nuclear horizon in a time which is both perilous and sublime, and through which each of us must carry the precious light. Thank you.